Hello, my name's Carl Niji and I'm the owner-operator of a business called Overcoming Dyslexia, ADD, ADHD and Learning Disabilities in Ottawa, Canada. I'm what's known as a Davis facilitator, and I get my job title from the gentleman that developed the Davis method and the Davis programs. I've talked about Ron in other videos, so you can go and watch those. I've talked about Ron's, really his major big discovery about what is at the root cause of dyslexia and other learning disabilities. And I discussed that at length in video number 4, which is all of the symptoms of dyslexia are actually the symptoms of somebody who's become disoriented. What I'd like to talk about today is a continuation of that idea and something that I discussed in that video. And it's this idea of trigger words. What is a trigger word? How does it work? How does it trigger somebody's dyslexia or learning disability? And you will probably know these, what we call on the Davis program, trigger words, but you will know them as either sight words or short connecting words. Most of these words that we refer to as trigger words are on the Deutsch word list. And they're really these short connecting words like is, the, why, them, who, what, when. And what most parents find kind of baffling for people who have learning disabilities is, why do people with dyslexia or learning disabilities have so much problem or so many difficulties reading sight words, understanding what they mean and spelling them? And it comes up again and again. My own dyslexia, I was constantly confused by the two types of there, ownership or position, and which one has the I in it, and I could never remember it. But those little tweaks, those little things that seem to pop up in reading and spelling and all the time really throw parents, and they say, well, why is it? Why is this child, who is a really bright, clever kid, can read words like caterpillar or really advanced words above their grade level, but they can't read the word if or what or when, and what's going on? So on the Davis program, we call these small connecting words, we call them trigger words. And there are about 200 of them, and we're going to discuss them today. So in order to really discuss trigger words and why they're a problem for a dyslexic person or anybody who has a learning disability, we have to sort of take several steps back and look at Ron's ideas again in a bit more detail. So in a video that was entitled, I did recently, that was entitled All the Symptoms of Dyslexia Are Actually the Symptoms of Somebody Who's Become Disoriented. That's video number 4, and I discussed Ron's really big discovery about what is at the root cause of dyslexia and therefore other learning disabilities as well. And once we understand that, that's really sort of like an awakening for many dyslexics. It's this sort of aha moment for dyslexics and for parents and for other people that have other forms of learning disability. So we're going to examine that idea and why is it that being disoriented is also a problem for these sight words. Now, one of the reasons that this is difficult to talk about or difficult to explain is because it's so incredibly simple. It is such an incredibly simple idea that is actually hard to explain. So we're going to have to sort of step back and explain it in pieces. I've got various ways I'm going to try to explain it, and hopefully the penny will drop. When it does drop on one of these ways that I'm going to explain it, you suddenly go, that's brilliant, that just makes so much sense. So first of all, though, we have to take a look at Ron's first realization is that all the symptoms of dyslexia are actually the symptoms of somebody who's become disoriented. So when somebody is disoriented, their brain doesn't get what their eyes see, they get what they think their eyes see. Their brain doesn't get what their ears hear, they get what they think their ears hear. Their balance and movement sense can be altered, and their internal sense of time can either speed up or slow down. So when Ron realized this, he realized that his perceptions, particularly of sight, were becoming distorted. And if you think of my palm of my hand as my brain and my fingers as my senses, when he became confused, he realized when he examined this idea of being disoriented and what was at the root cause of it, he realized actually that it was confusion. So he would begin to get confused about something, and the confusion would build and build and build and build and build. Eventually then he would pop. And I like to think of it as an escape valve. And when he popped, he would become disoriented. Now, if we think of my brain, of my palm of my hand as my brain, and my fingers as my senses, when my fingers are straight, my senses are accurate, and my brain gets the information coming in from my eyesight or my hearing or my touch. But when I'm disoriented, when my fingers are bent, my senses are bent out of shape and they're distorted, so they're disoriented. So my brain can't make sense of all of my all of the information coming in from my senses. So I'm disoriented. So Ron looked at this for a long time and thought, well, I basically as I get confused and more confused, I reach this threshold of confusion, or the ceiling, or the pressure builds and I can't take it anymore. So I disorient, I get disoriented, my senses get bent out of shape, and then my brain doesn't get what my eyes are seeing, gets what I think my eyes are seeing. So he said, well, what am I getting confused about? What is it that's really confusing me? So when he looked at particularly reading, he realized that it was symbols. He was getting confused about symbols. So what's a symbol? So that's a symbol. Now we know it as the letter A, of course, or B, C, D, the letters of the alphabet. But technically what this is actually a symbol. This picture is a pictorial representation of two things, a sound, A and A. And it doesn't matter how much he looked at this as a young child, he could not get the meaning from it, because this is a two-dimensional flat thing. And what this means is two sounds, A, A. So that was one of his big discoveries. And as I said, I cover it in another video extensively. Then Ron realized, well, all words are made up of symbols. So if I get disoriented over symbols, I'm going to get disoriented over words. So it won't work with words. It just creates more confusion. Well, originally, when he got himself oriented and he had a method for orienting himself or focusing or concentrating his mind, he thought that was it. He also developed a method for de-triggering or stopping the confusion around symbols and letters. And he thought, well, that's it, I'm done. But he wasn't done. He wasn't done at all. What he realized when he looked even closer was that because some words he could quite easily picture and understand, there was a meaning for that word, like this is a pen, and he understood what a pen was. But then he also realized that there were other words that when he said them, there was no real thing for it. It was a concept, it was an idea, it wasn't actually a real thing. And what he realized when he looked at this more and more and more is he began to realize that as a dyslexic person, he was thinking very strongly in pictures. So in order to, again, understand trigger words, we have to understand the two ways that people think. There are probably more ways than that, but for this discussion, there's basically two ways. And if we think of them like a spectrum, at one end of the spectrum, there's what we call nonverbal conceptualization. And this is sounds sort of ever so complicated, but really it's just thinking with images or pictures. I could close my eyes and make a picture of an apple, and I could just think it, I could see it, it's green, it's got a little of a stalk, I can change the color to red, and I can imagine an apple. I could also get very complicated and close my eyes and imagine a car, walk around the car, look at the front, look at the sides, go around the back, open the door, get in the door, and almost like a 3D sort of hologram, I could move through my picture thinking. Now, I'm very aware of my picture thinking because of my own dyslexia, so that wasn't hard for me to understand, but for some people it really is. And when I was training, one of my friends who's a facilitator I sometimes like to tease quite a lot, she's a lovely lady, and she was really struggling though with this idea of picture thinking because she was not a picture thinker. And I said, well, look, have you ever dreamt? Have you ever had a dream where you know what that's like? She said, yeah, that's picture thinking. That's all it is. So you're using imagery of real things that you have actually seen with your real eyes, and you have pictured them. So that's picture thinking. And some people that's all the type of thinking that they do. And actually that's the type of thinking that children begin with. When children are very, very young, they have picture thinking and they learn the other type of thinking. At the other end of this spectrum, so picture thinking's at one end. Now we call it picture thinking, but traditionally it's actually called nonverbal conceptualization. That's how it's sort of thought of. But on the Davis program, because we're working with little ones, we call it picture thinking, or thinking with pictures and images. The other way of thinking is verbal thinking. And this is thinking with the sounds of words. So it's an internal dialogue, an internal monologue that's going on as you're speaking to yourself. Some people literally, as I'm talking out aloud, they're just talking in their own heads all the time. Things like, well, what am I going to do today? I've got to get some shopping. I've got to get some bread, some cheese, some milk. And they're thinking in words. And they're sometimes when they say certain words, they actually, you can see the word in their head spelled. So this is what we call verbal conceptualization. And there's a lot on the internet. You can go and look at Google or YouTube. There's lots of videos talking about these sort of two types of thinking. And what Ron realized was, and this is the sort of the big aha moment again that he had, is that as a dyslexic person, he was way up this other end of the spectrum. He was really a pictorial thinker, and he didn't really think in words. And if you think about this on a long enough timeline, you realize, well, all children probably start as picture thinkers, and as they learn language, as they get older and they learn to talk, and their sort of goo-goo sounds turn into audible sounds, then they turn into words, and then they actually learn to read, and they go through that process. They learn verbal thinking. Verbal thinking is also lineal because we start on one side of a word, we go k, a, t, so it's a straight line. So we often refer to it on the Dave's program also as lineal thinking. So what Ron realized was that as a strong picture thinker, most people are probably somewhere in the middle. So we have lineal thinking at one end, or verbal conceptualization at this end, non-verbal conceptualization at this end, and the average person is probably in the middle and can do some of both. Some people are very lineal and have no picture thinking ability, or very little, and some people have a very, very strong picture thinkers and have sort of no verbal thinking ability. And Ron realized that that's the way he was. And he realized that he could easily think in pictures. And so when he was reading, there were words that when he read them, made a picture. But there were over 200 words that when he read them, did not make a picture. Well, that's really difficult. So what kind of words are these words? Well, and how do you explain all of this to a child? Well, one of the things that one of the ways that I do it in several ways. One is I've been talking with them in a much simpler way than I am right now about trigger words. And usually I'm about to do some reading with them. And the way I'll explain it to them is this. I'll say, well, if that's a pen, right, and I have a blue pen in my hand, can you, and I say pen, so pen, blue pen, but if I say the pen, can you put a the in this hand? Where's the the? Can you find it? Where is it? Is there one in this room? Have you ever seen a the? Is there a the in your mum's handbag? And they'll say, no, there isn't. Oh, right, there isn't. This the is a concept. It's an idea. There's actually no such thing as a the. You can't put a pound of the in my hand. You just can't do it. And sometimes with little kids, in fact, I did this with I think a 10-year-old boy, and told him that once he finished the assessment, which is where I first introduced him to this idea of picture thinking words and non-picture words, I said to him, once you leave here, you can go to a store and buy some groceries, and you can get some milk or some cheese, and then find a manager and say, excuse me, sir, I'm looking for some the. I found the cheese, I found the milk, I found the cookies, and I'd like some dried was. Got any dried was? Okay, yeah. How about fresh was? I'd really love some fresh was. No fresh was? I'll take canned. No, don't have any? You can't do it, can you? Of course, at this point, the kid's usually giggling. I'll say the other thing you do is say, okay, if you don't have any dried was and you don't have any fresh was, can I have a can of it? Can't have a can of it, can you? You can't, these are not real things, they're ideas, they're concepts. So what Ron realized is the more of these non-pictorial words that he read, the more his confusion would build. Then he would pop, then he would become disoriented, his brain wasn't getting what his eyes were seeing, and he misread them. Or sometimes the letters would move or go fuzzy. And if you watch kids read or listen to them read, they will often slip up and on these trigger words. And why they're such difficulty, I'm going to explain in a little while. So some people, that isn't enough. Some people say, well, with particularly with people that are very dubious on this whole idea, or they're really up on the lineal thinking end of this idea. They say, well, I can picture a the. I can just picture the word the. Right? There it is, the. I just see it in my head, the. Yeah, but that's the letters. Where's the? Can you put a the in my hand? You can't do it. And what Ron realized is as a picture thinker, he actually needed a picture. His subconscious brain in particular needed a picture for the thing. Otherwise, he couldn't fully understand it. When he couldn't fully understand it, it would create confusion. As the confusion built and built and built, eventually he would disorient, and then we could see the symptoms. Now it looks like somebody's got this learning disability. What they've got is confusion, and they're disorienting to try and end the confusion. So that's one way I describe it. And if you're watching this video and you're listening to your child read and you're looking, just listen to them read and see if they slip up on these small connecting words. And if they do, then Davis can help. So what Ron realized was, he realized that he got disoriented on symbols. So he developed a way of dealing with the symbols and getting rid of the confusion over that. And then he developed out of that a method for dealing with these small abstract words that we call trigger words because they trigger the disorientation. So if you're still not convinced, one of the ways that I always also explain it to people is when I'm dealing with young learners. So a young learner would be somebody who is age 7 and down. So 5, 6, 7, maybe 7.5. They're not as aware of their picture thinking as older kids. So I will often play a little game with them and tell them that there are 3 parts of the word. And one of the exercises that we do in Davis is to create our own word so the child understands there are 3 parts of the word. There's what the word looks like, there's what the word sounds like, and there's what the word means. And if I need to understand the whole word, and if I can think with the whole word, I need to understand all 3 parts of these words. So for a 6-year-old, I developed a little game that I play with them. So what I will do is I'll say, okay, first of all, I'll have a really simple explanation for the 3 parts of the word. And usually the kid is still sort of scratching their head a little bit, not really getting it. And I'll say, okay, so there's mum. Sorry, this is going to show up backwards, but I'll show them the word mum on a card and say, can you point to a mum? And of course, they'll point to a mum. So I'll say, right, on this card, that's what the word looks like, mum. That's what the word sounds like when we say it, mum, and is there a mum in this room? And of course they'll point to their mum. Great, obvious. What about a pen? Can you show me a pen? They'll point to a pen. Glasses, shirt. So I'll go through a few so they understand, yeah, these are real objects. And you know each part of that word. You know what the word looks like, mum, when it's spelt, what the word sounds like when you say it, and there's a mum. You can point to a mum. She sat right next to you. And they go, right, great, got it. Well, if you knew what one of the words looked like, and you knew what it sounded like, but you'd never seen one of these things, how would you know what it was? So what I developed was a game. Unfortunately, this is going to show up backwards on this camera, but I will show them the word. Here's a word. It's lychee. So lychee. That's what the word looks like. Lychee. Great. So what it sounds like when I say those letters, lychee, that's what it sounds like. Well, I've got a lychee in this bag. Have you ever seen a lychee before? And most of them will be like, no. And I'll say, could you draw a lychee? And usually I have a pad of paper and a crayon. And I'll also do this with things like prickly pears or dragon fruit. Prickly pear is a great one because the kid instantly will just draw a pear with prickles on it. That's not what a prickly pear is. So I'll go through a few of these fruits. And of course, I'll get them to draw. So I'll get them to draw a lychee. And they struggle to draw a lychee. And I say, okay, I'm going to show you what a lychee is. I'm going to get it out of the bag. And there's a lychee. Look, there it is. Boom. There's a lychee. Great. So we know what the word looks like, lychee. We know what the word sounds like. There it is. And very often we'll end up eating it, tasting it. Obviously, I can use fruits like passion fruit, which tastes delicious, or pomegranate is another one that tastes great. And I'll do this with little ones, kids who are anywhere from 5.5 to sort of 7.5. And they'll really get this idea that there are 3 parts of the word. What the word looks like, what the word sounds like, and what the word means. And if I don't understand each part of that, my brain can't think with that word, so I won't understand it. So again, we're back to the same idea. There's a pen, right? Pen, where's the? Can you put a the in my hand? Once I've played that little game with little ones, they usually get that there are these words that don't have pictures, because I'll say, could you draw a the? They don't have to draw a the. Well, I then go on and do Davis symbol mastery with these children in the same way that we deal with getting rid of the triggers around the alphabet, getting rid of the triggers around punctuation. Ron developed a method to extend his method to deal with trigger words and eliminating the confusion that comes along with trigger words. So we will do that with them, and that's part of what the Davis program is. Once the kid has done that, once the kid has done all of their trigger words, they're usually reading at grade level or very close to it. In fact, I've had some children who, once they've got through half of their trigger words in about 6 months, they're already reading at grade level. So why are trigger words so important? If the penny hasn't dropped yet, we're going to show you another example of why it's so important and why trigger words are so horrible for people with learning disabilities. So again, this is going to show up backwards, but there is a page of grade 1 material at the bottom. If you freeze it, it will say grade level 1 passage B. So this is right in the middle of grade 1. All right, there it is at the bottom. And this is grading material. This is actually some material that is used on psych ed assessments. So why have I pulled this out? Well, I often show this to parents, to mums and dads who are sort of struggling to understand this idea of trigger words. And I'll say, well, this is why it's such a problem. When we look at reading material, on this page that I've just shown you, there are 83 words. Now, of those 83 words, I've underlined all the trigger words. There you go. They're all underlined. There's a lot of them. On this page, there are 83 words. 67 of them are trigger words, so they cannot be pictured. There's no mental image for 67 of these words. 16 of them you can picture, and actually it should actually be 14 because 2 of them have are no body, and no is a trigger word, body you can picture. So really this should be 69 trigger words, and only 14 words you can picture. The other problem in here is that there's 31 pieces of punctuation on this page, and that means that there are 98 things that can trigger the confusion, right? And when the kid gets confused, it will trigger their disorientation. Now it looks like they have a reading disability, or what they actually have is a disorientation problem. So if we just take a look at this and delve down into the first sentence, it says, "What will I do?" ? Well, for somebody who's dyslexic, the first word is a trigger word. What? Will is a trigger word. I is a trigger word. Do is a trigger word. Question is also a trigger word. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things in that sentence. No picture. Got absolutely nothing. The next sentence says, "Here comes my mum home from work now." Period. Well, here is a trigger word, comes is a trigger word, my is a trigger word, mum, first word. I can picture a mum. Home, I can picture a home. From, can't picture that. Work. Well, if I'm in the middle of grade 1, I'm 6 years old. I don't really know what work is, but I might have an image for it because I might have traveled to my mum or dad's work. Now, no trigger word. So in those first 2 sentences, I've got 3 things. One of them I might have difficulty with. The next sentence says, "She will say, comma." That's trigger, 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 trigger. You getting the idea yet? All right. So the next sentence is in parentheses, and then it says, quotation marks, because that could be a trigger. "No one should have 6 cats." There's a comma, David, period. Not even us is the next sentence. So in that following sentence is no one, that's a trigger word, 1, trigger word, should, trigger word, have, trigger word, 6 cats. Okay, comma can get me. David, I can picture a David if I can read people's names at age 6. Not even us, trigger word, plus a period, plus the end of the quotation. So in the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences, the only words that are going to generate a picture in my head are mum, home, work, 6 cats, David. And we wonder why dyslexic people have a problem. And it doesn't get any better, okay? It just keeps on going. Now, this is a particularly nasty piece of grade 1. Why is it so nasty? Well, there are 98 things that can cause disorientation on this page, okay? There are 67 words and 31 pieces of punctuation that my deep subconscious picture thinking mind doesn't have an image for, and I'm gonna go. And as I read the first sentence, I'm going to get confused. What? More confusion, more confusion, more confusion. So what? Confusion. Will? Confusion. I? Confusion. Do? Confusion. Question mark. Confusion. Pop. I'm gone on the first sentence. Okay? Get it? Right? It becomes pretty obvious once you understand it. Now, why this is so horrible for dyslexics and other people with learning disabilities is that over the 10 years that I've been working with Davis, with the Davis method, and I've been counting trigger words on a page. And generally speaking, in the lower grade levels, so I'd say grade 1 through to about grade 4, at least half of the material, half of the words on the page are trigger words. Once you get older into older grades, like grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, it begins to fall off as less than half sometimes. Sometimes it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just a third of the words on that page, or a third of the words in a sentence. But generally speaking, it's nasty. It shows up a hell of a lot. And now we wonder why kids are struggling with these small conceptual words that are really giving them a problem, because they're showing up again and again and again and again and again, just endlessly in reading material. The child is becoming more and more confused, and as they read through this page, eventually they're going to go. If they don't go in the first couple of sentences, by the time they get to the end of the story, like you saw in the first paragraph, there are only 3 or 4 words that I can actually picture and understand. At best, maybe 6. Right, so this is the main reason why kids trigger on reading, and why reading is such a big thing on the Davis program. The Davis program is not just a literacy program though. However, the first program that we do really does focus on the basic idea of being disoriented, and it does deal with literacy on the first program. So that's why it's often thought of as a literacy program only. But the Davis programs go way beyond literacy, because actually what we're doing is dealing with the child's mind and how their mind works, and what you need in order to really understand how you think and how you learn. What's interesting about trigger words and the Davis program is when kids have done all of their trigger words using this method that Ron developed, is most of them are reading at grade level really simply and easily, usually within the first 6 to 8 months. Most of my clients get probably about a year improvement in reading in 1 week with me. And that's pretty standard for most of the kids who I work with. And I work with all ranges of learning disabilities, everything from type 1, type 2. It's rare that somebody in Ottawa gets diagnosed with dyslexia, but I deal with a lot of kids who have ADD, ADHD, and these sorts of labels. So that's it for now. I hope this is rather a long video, but it's a big subject. And once the penny really drops for people and they understand the significance of why kids are struggling with these sight words, as we call them, is mainly because there isn't a picture. There's no such thing as a the. It just doesn't exist. And it creates confusion. And that's what triggers the learning disability. Okay, so if you'd like to continue this conversation, please feel free to contact me at my website, overcomingdyslexia.ca. If you'd like to find a Davis facilitator closest to you, then go to the next listing below, which is dyslexia.com. That's the Davis international website for all facilitators. You'll be able to find any facilitator in the world there. If you're interested in Davis Autism, you can go to the listing there, and I've also listed Ron's books. So please like, share, and subscribe this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye for now.